If you asked anyone in my family what love meant, they'd give you a list of obligations, not feelings. My name is Elena Hartmann. I'm 26 years old, freshly graduated from Columbia with a degree in international law. To most people, that alone would be something to celebrate. But in my family, it was only another expected milestone, a brick in the foundation of a life designed long before I took my first breath. My father, Charles Hartmann, is a senior diplomat who has served under 3 presidents and negotiated treaties that have made headlines. My mother, Genevieve Rousseau Hartmann, comes from old French nobility. Her family lost their titles, but never their expectations. And I'm their daughter, raised for legacy, sculpted for status, destined to marry well, and represent a dynasty that has no patience for emotion. I had escaped all of it, so I thought, when I left for New York at 18. For 6 beautiful, chaotic, rebellious years I was free. I dated a painter named James, ate Chinese takeout from the box on fire escapes, danced at underground clubs until my feet blistered, and once even dyed my hair blue. But I knew none of it would last. James once said he could see forever in my eyes. I didn't have the heart to tell him that my forever wasn't mine to give. So I left him, and the freedom, and the recklessness, and returned to the illusion of control. When my father called that September afternoon, I should have known something was wrong. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask about my flight. Just 2 words. Come home. The driver who picked me up from the airport wasn't familiar. No smile, no welcome, just a silent nod, and a long black car that felt more like a hearse than a homecoming. The Hartmann estate sat behind a gated drive in the English countryside, stone and glass and perfection. Inside, the drawing room was filled with faces I hadn't seen in years. My younger brother Julian, who had dropped out of Yale to run a fintech company, my Aunt Camille and Uncle Edward from Bordeaux, even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to since childhood. And in the center of it all, my grandmother, Margaret Rousseau, seated like a queen with pearls at her throat and judgment in her eyes. After the obligatory dinner, the silence came sharp, expectant, heavy. My father cleared his throat, folded his hands, and said it. Elena, we've accepted a marriage proposal on your behalf. I thought he was joking. Excuse me, I said, blinking. My mother took over, always the diplomat. The Hamilton family. Their eldest son, Lucas. He's 30, educated at Oxford, now with the Ministry of Defense. A good man from a very stable lineage. Have I met him? He's seen your profile, she said, as if I were a product in a catalog. And of course we sent over your academic and medical records. I felt cold. So you've arranged a merger. And I'm the asset. My grandmother finally spoke, her voice like lace over steel. This is how it's always been, darling. You're not marrying for fireworks. You're marrying for foundation. I stood up. That's not a reason. That's a funeral. My father didn't flinch. You'll meet him on Saturday. Be respectful. For 3 days I didn't speak to anyone. Every time I tried to confront my mother, she'd sigh and say things like, "You'll understand one day," or "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My father didn't speak to me at all. I thought about texting James. I even typed out the message. Do you ever think about what we lost? But I deleted it before I pressed send. Saturday came. I wore a pale blue silk dress that my mother had selected, conservative, graceful, and utterly lifeless. She adjusted my earrings before we left and whispered, "Don't challenge him. Just listen." The Hamilton estate made ours look modest. Marble columns, oil paintings, a garden manicured like Versailles. Lucas was waiting by the fountain, tall, immaculately dressed, and utterly unreadable. "Elena," he said, shaking my hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." I gave him a polite smile. Likewise. We were escorted to the Rose Garden for private time, though our parents hovered nearby like stage directors. "I imagine this isn't your dream afternoon," Lucas said once we were out of earshot. "Not exactly. It's not mine either." He looked at me directly. "But I've found it's better to make peace with the inevitable." "And what exactly are you proposing?"
A transactionnelle alliance.
"Something like that," he said. "We marry, we satisfy our families, we live our own lives discreetly. No drama."
No scandal.
No expectations beyond appearances. Sounds sterile. It is. But it's safe. And safety is a rare commodity in families like ours. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But instead I nodded. Because deep down I understood. I understood that I wasn't being offered a life. I was being offered a cage with golden walls. That night, I stared at my old bedroom ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, remembering every lie I'd told myself to survive. In the morning, I walked into the conservatory, where my father sat reading the Financial Times. I stood silently until he looked up. "I'll meet him again," I said. "But I'm not promising anything." He nodded once. Not with pride, not with joy, but with expectation, as if this was the only answer I was ever allowed to give. The second meeting was arranged like a business lunch, sterile, scheduled, and almost aggressively polite. We met at Le Chain, a private French restaurant frequented by diplomats and quiet scandals. The staff greeted us by name, led us to a corner table by the window, and vanished like well-trained ghosts. Lucas arrived 5 minutes early, as I suspected he always would. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie, and had the kind of posture that had been coached into him since childhood. I noticed how his hands stayed folded on the table, how his eyes rarely flicked to his phone. He was the embodiment of control. "Elena," he greeted me as I sat down. "I hope the setting is acceptable." "It's fine," I replied, "though it's interesting to dine in a place where everyone pretends not to be listening." That earned the ghost of a smile. "It was either here or the conservatory at your estate. At least here we can order wine without raising eyebrows." We ordered Chardonnay and a few dishes I didn't taste. Most of the conversation felt like diplomacy. Pleasant, calculated, devoid of vulnerability. He asked about my studies. I asked about his time in Geneva. He mentioned skiing in Zermatt. I told him I preferred beaches. For a moment I forgot we were being maneuvered into marriage. It felt like a high-level interview, two people deciding if they could tolerate a lifetime of cohabitation without war. "May I ask you something?" Lucas said as dessert was being cleared. "Of course. Is there someone else?" The question caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't expected it, but because it was asked so plainly. No emotion, no accusation. Just curiosity. There was, I admitted. A long time ago. It ended before it ever really began. "And you haven't tried to rekindle it?" He wasn't the kind of man my family would ever accept. It would have ended badly. Lucas nodded. "Then we have that in common." I looked up. "You." He swirled the last of his wine. "Her name was Anaïs. We met in Lyon. She was an artist, loved messy apartments and street food and chaos. I loved her. Or I think I did. But I left her behind the moment I was called home." "Why?" "Because my father said I was done being selfish." The bitterness in his voice surprised me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of someone real beneath the polish. A man who had also learned to bury the parts of himself that didn't serve the family script. "Lucas," I said carefully, "why are you really doing this?" "Because I'm tired," he said, looking straight into my eyes. "Tired of pretending that duty and desire are the same thing. Tired of being told who to be. I figured if I can't marry for love, I might as well marry someone who understands that." The honesty of it undid me. I sat there staring into the face of a stranger, and saw not a villain, not a puppet but a mirror. We were both products of legacy. Both raised to be tools, not people. And now, somehow, we were meant to build a life out of the ruins of our choices. The engagement made headlines in every society column that mattered. Hartmann and Hamilton, the alliance of the year they called it. Photos of Lucas and me were plastered across glossy magazines. His strong jawline and steely composure beside my demure smile and icy eyes. They said we looked perfect together. That we were a symbol of tradition, of power, of legacy. No one mentioned the silence between us. No one asked why we never touched when the cameras weren't looking. No one knew that beneath the diamond ring on my finger was a hollow I couldn't name. The days following the announcement passed in a blur of meetings with florists, planners, dressmakers, and etiquette coaches who seemed more interested in my posture than my state of mind. My mother managed everything with militaristic precision, often reminding me that this wedding wasn't just about me. "It's about the family, Elena." About what this marriage means for all of us. I smiled, nodded, agreed. But inside, something had started to fracture. It wasn't the wedding itself. It wasn't even Lucas, who remained as respectful and emotionally distant as always. It was the letter. It arrived without warning. No return address, no name, just my initials written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. And yet I knew immediately. James. There were only 4 lines inside. 4 tiny perfect sentences. Do you remember the rooftop on Delancey? The wine. The thunderstorm? I still do. J. I must have read it 100 times that night. I still remembered that rooftop, how the rain had come down in waves while we drank cheap red wine and kissed like we were the only people left in New York. I remembered his laughter, loud and wild, and the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that made sense in a chaotic world. I remembered how safe I had felt in his arms, and how completely I had betrayed him. James had loved me recklessly. I had left him surgically. No note, no call, just silence. Because I knew the truth. My world and his didn't overlap. I couldn't take him home to my family. I couldn't imagine him sitting beside my father at a formal dinner, or walking through our estate in a paint-splattered hoodie. I had convinced myself it was kindness, that ending it abruptly was better than giving him false hope. But now, years later, his handwriting on a single page had unraveled everything I had built to protect myself. I didn't tell anyone. Not Lucas. Not my mother. Not even my reflection. But I wrote back. I didn't know what I expected to come of it. Closure? Chaos? I only knew that I couldn't bear the idea of that letter being the last thread between us. I sent it the same way he had sent his. Anonymous, unsigned. Left with the doorman at the old apartment building on Delancey Street, where we once shared Sunday mornings and cinnamon coffee. In it I wrote, I remember the rooftop. I remember everything. I think I always will. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then 7. I convinced myself that he wasn't going to respond. That perhaps he had only written in a moment of nostalgia, and had since returned to a life I was no longer part of. And then on the 8th day the second letter arrived. This one was longer. And angrier. You don't get to pretend this didn't destroy me, he wrote. You don't get to open that door, unless you're ready to walk through it. I loved you, Elena. I would have done anything. I would have followed you anywhere. You didn't even give me a chance. And beneath that, scrawled in his familiar, hurried hand, was a single question. Why now? I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't know how to explain that despite everything, despite Lucas, despite the dress fittings, the diamond ring, the 5-tiered wedding cake being designed in Vienna, he still had a piece of me that I never truly buried. That even now, with my future mapped out in ivory programs and gold-embossed invitations, I found myself longing for a past that had never been allowed to bloom. But I wrote anyway, because I never stopped loving you, because I'm terrified I made a mistake I can't undo, because I still dream about you. I didn't hear from him for a week. During that time, Lucas and I continued our performance. We attended a charity ball in Brussels. We gave a joint interview to a British magazine. We discussed honeymoon options like we were planning a company retreat. I began to notice things about him I hadn't before. How he ordered his drinks without ever looking at a menu. How he always stood slightly behind me in photos. How he watched me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Not with lust, not even affection, but something more complicated. Recognition, perhaps. Like he saw the ghost in me. And he carried one of his own. One night, as we sat in his family's countryside home going over seating charts, he surprised me. You're not happy, he said. I blinked. Neither are you. No, he agreed. But I think we could be. How? He looked away for a moment, then met my eyes. By giving each other what no one else will, permission. To live a half-truth, perhaps. But a peaceful one. I didn't know what hurt more. That he was offering me freedom within a cage. Or that I was genuinely considering it. The third letter came just before midnight. Slid under the door of my London flat like a secret. I want to see you, James had written. If only once. If only to say goodbye properly. Meet me on the rooftop. Sunday, 8 p.m. I held the note in my hands for a long time. The smart thing would have been to burn it. To delete his number. To forget. But I wasn't smart anymore. I was heartsick. Sunday came. The sky was gray. just like that old summer night. I told my mother I had an alumni dinner. I told Lucas I needed space. I wore the same coat I'd worn the last time James kissed me in the rain. When I stepped onto the rooftop, he was already there, hands in his pockets, eyes on the skyline. He didn't turn around when I approached. "You came," he said quietly. "I didn't know if you would." "I didn't know either," I replied. He looked at me then, and the pain in his face made something twist in my chest. He looked older, harder, still beautiful, but in a way that spoke of battles lost and boundaries rebuilt. "You look the same," he said. "But you're not. Neither are you." We stood in silence, listening to the city hum beneath us. "Why did you really leave?" he asked. "Because I was a coward," I whispered. "Because I loved you, and I knew I would lose you once my world swallowed me whole. So I tried to leave before it hurt more." "It still hurt," he said. "It still does." "I know." He stepped closer. "Are you going to marry him?" I hesitated, then nodded. "It's already done." "Do you love him?"
No.
"Then why?" "Because it's what's expected. Because I don't know how to break free without shattering everything." He reached for my hand. "Let it shatter." I pulled away. "I can't." He nodded slowly, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes but never falling. "Then this is goodbye." I didn't kiss him. I didn't ask him to wait. I just watched as he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like the memory he had become. When I returned to the estate that evening, Lucas was waiting in the library. He didn't ask where I had been. He simply poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed me one. "Did it help?" he asked. "No," I said. "Will you still marry me?" I stared at him for a long time. Then I whispered, "Yes." Because what else was there? The weeks leading to the wedding unfolded like a rehearsed opera, each moment choreographed with the precision of a political summit. My dress fittings in Paris, our engagement shoot in Vienna, the pre-wedding brunch hosted by the Minister of Finance's daughter, all of it executed flawlessly, all of it soulless. I walked through these days as if my body were a mannequin and my mind had relocated elsewhere. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere James never looked back from. Lucas, to his credit, never pressed. We had reached an understanding after that night. An unspoken agreement to carry on, to play our roles, to protect the illusion for everyone but ourselves. But the silence between us had grown heavier, more brittle, as if the weight of every unsaid word might cause the entire facade to crack. I had moments, brief ones, where I tried to convince myself that peace was better than passion, that security was better than sincerity, that marrying Lucas, a man who wouldn't demand my heart but would protect my name, was still better than burning my life to the ground. But in those moments I would hear James's voice again. "Let it shatter," and the ground beneath me would tilt ever so slightly. It was during one of the final wedding planning dinners, with both families gathered around the mahogany table in Lucas's family estate, that I felt it most acutely. My mother was discussing flower arrangements with Genevieve, Lucas's icy, aristocratic mother, who seemed permanently scented with old money and subtle contempt. My father and Lucas's father were arguing over wine pairings as if they were negotiating an arms treaty. Lucas sat beside me, stoic, efficient, and exhausted. I watched him from the corner of my eye, saw the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the stem of his wine glass. And suddenly I felt it, this rising wave of something between grief and guilt. We were both prisoners in a golden cage. We had built brick by brick, bound by bloodlines and legacies neither of us had asked for. I excused myself to the terrace, claiming a headache. The sky was bruised with clouds. A summer storm was threatening in the distance. I stood there, hands clutching the railing, and for a fleeting second I considered running. Not metaphorically, literally, just slipping into the night, disappearing into a place where no one knew my name. But I knew better. I had tried that once with James. And I had come back. I always came back. A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "You look like you're mourning your own funeral." I turned to see Lucas standing behind me, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his tie slightly loosened. He joined me at the railing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I met her again." I blinked. "Who?" "Anais," he replied. "The woman I told you about." "When?" "2 weeks ago. In Lyon." She was at an art exhibit. We talked for 20 minutes. Did you tell her?
No.
I couldn't. He paused. She had a ring on her finger. Someone else claimed her years ago. I nodded, strangely comforted by his honesty. Do you regret it? I asked. Letting her go? He took a sip of his drink. Every day. We stood there, the storm creeping closer. What are we doing, Lucas? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Pretending, he said. Because pretending is safer than falling apart. But we're already falling apart. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Would you leave if you thought he was still waiting? I didn't answer. 'Cause I didn't know. Or maybe I did and couldn't face the truth. That night I dreamt of James. Not the James the first had left, but the James who still lived in the moments we had shared. His laughter echoing off subway walls. His fingers tangled in my hair. The way he used to whisper stories into my neck when I couldn't sleep. In the dream, he held my hand and led me down a hallway filled with doors. At the end of the corridor was a single door painted blue. He told me, "You have to choose." When I opened it, I woke up. I couldn't eat the next morning. I canceled my dress fitting. I turned off my phone. The silence was unbearable, but it was the only space I had left that belonged to me. Later that evening, Lucas came to my suite. Not as a groom, but as something quieter. Maybe even as a friend. He sat on the floor, while I curled up in the window seat. My father asked if we'd considered children yet, he said. I laughed, dry and humorless. Did you tell him we'd have them imported like furniture? That made him smile. A real one, the first in weeks. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if we had met under different circumstances? He asked. All the time, I replied. Do you think we would have fallen in love? I thought about it. About his kindness, his integrity, his loneliness. Maybe, I said. But not like this. Not when everything is so conditional. He nodded. I wonder if it's better to have love that hurts or peace that numbs. I didn't have an answer. Neither did he. 2 days before the wedding, I received a final letter. This one didn't come by envelope. It was hand-delivered to my suite by the concierge of the hotel. Folded, not sealed. Inside there was only one sentence. This is your last chance.
No signature. No explanation.
But I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. I knew that ultimatum. I stared at it for hours. Read it until the paper felt soft between my fingers. I held it like it was a lifeline and an anchor all at once. And for the first time since the engagement began, I cried. Not quiet, delicate tears, but the kind that feel like confession. That night I told Lucas everything. About the letters. The rooftop. The goodbye that didn't feel final. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he simply said, Then you need to go. What? I said, startled. You need to see him. One last time. Whatever happens after that, at least you'll know. And so will I. But what if I don't come back? Then I'll handle it. Just tell me when you know. I left the next morning. The train ride to the coast was quiet. I sat in a first-class cabin surrounded by strangers whose lives were untouched by mine. The world moved past the window in a blur of fields and sky, and for the first time in what felt like months, I wasn't being watched. There were no photographers, no stylists, no parents whispering about duty or appearances. Just the rhythm of the tracks beneath me, steady and certain. I didn't know what I was going to say to James. I didn't even know if he would be there. The note hadn't included a time, a place, just the sharp finality of this is your last chance. But my heart knew, the same way it had always known him. He was staying in a seaside town we used to talk about visiting, Weymouth. A sleepy place with cliffs and wind and lonely beauty. He once told me he dreamed of painting there. I had laughed. I was always laughing back then. Always believing we had more time. When I arrived, the air smelled like salt and secrets. I took a cab to the address I'd found on an old postcard he had once mailed me during our brief, shining summer together. I remember reading it in the Columbia Library, hiding it in a law textbook, so no one would see my hands shaking. I knocked. The door opened slowly. He looked older, just like I did. But those eyes, the ones that used to look at me like I was both miracle and menace, hadn't changed. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I didn't think I would either, I whispered. So, he asked, why are you here, Elena? Because I needed to see you. One last time. Not as the girl who left. Not as the woman who's marrying someone else. Just as me. He let me in. The cottage was small. Sparse. Canvases leaned against the wall, half-finished, moody, full of storms and silence. It smelled like oil paint and sea air. He made tea. As if we were old friends catching up instead of fractured people looking for something we'd lost. Do you love him? He asked, not looking at me. No. Does he love you? Not in the way that matters. Then why? Because it's what I was raised for. To be useful. Strategic. Expected. And what do you want? The question hit harder than I expected. I had been asked that before countless times, but only now did I realize I had never truly answered. Because wanting in my world was dangerous. Wanting meant choosing. And choosing meant risking everything. I looked up. I want a life that's mine. I want to wake up beside someone who knows me, not the curated version but the chaotic, contradictory, complicated me. I want to laugh again. I want to mess up and fix it and fall in love and not apologize for it. James nodded slowly. That's the woman I fell in love with. That's the woman I wrote to. But I don't know if she still exists under all that silk and ice. Neither do I said. But I want to find her again. He reached across the table, took my hand. Then stay. It was so simple. 2 words. And yet they echoed through my chest like thunder. If I stay, I said, I lose everything. My family. My name. The life they've built for me. No, he replied. If you go back, you lose yourself. I closed my eyes, breathed, listened to the waves outside, felt the gravity of a choice I had been circling for years. Then I said it. I'm not going back. The following days were a blur of phone calls I didn't answer, messages I didn't read. My mother called 37 times. My father left a single voicemail. You're making a mistake. Lucas sent 1 text. Just 1. Take care of yourself. I cried when I read it. Because even though he wasn't the love of my life, he was the first person in my world who ever let me choose. I didn't return to London, or Paris, or the estate. I stayed in Weymouth with James. We didn't pick up where we left off. Too much had changed. We had changed. But we began again. Slowly. Carefully. We walked along the cliffs in the mornings. He painted. I read. We argued sometimes. Over groceries. Over whether cats or dogs made better companions. Over nothing, really. But it felt like living. One evening months later we were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun dip behind the sea. He turned to me and said, I was afraid you'd leave again. I looked at him. I was too. But you didn't.
No.
I finally stopped running. He smiled and I knew I had chosen right. Years later, when people asked how I left the life everyone else wanted for me, I told them the truth. I walked away from perfection to find peace. From expectation to freedom. From a diamond ring to bare hands holding real love. And I never looked back.